Okay. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another week of Exeter Science Park webinars. Absolutely delighted today to welcome David Ralph to talk about the Heart of the Southwest's COVID-19 route map to recovery. David is Chief Exec of the Heart of the Southwest Local Enterprise Partnership. He's working with local stakeholders to develop an effective local industrial strategy and implement a huge array of opportunities around nuclear, marine, food, farming, data analytics, photonics, and other key sectors across the Southwest. In his role, he is the point man really for economic recovery for the government. And so I'm really delighted to invite David to talk to us. David, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Sally. Hi, everybody. This is actually quite well timed because at the end of last week we published our route map to recovery, and this is a very high-level sort of summary of what we think is important over the next few months as we go back towards some kind of normality. Suffice to say that we're not convinced that it will be normal at all. There are going to be absolutely a number of very clear changes, and it is very difficult to predict what they are, but I'll talk about them a little bit further. I've got a few slides, but there's essentially two or three themes that I just wanted to discuss, really. So just a reminder that the Heart of the Southwest covers Devon, Torbay, Plymouth and Somerset. So it's about 1.8 million people, about 90 or 80 odd thousand businesses, and an annual turnover of about somewhere between 37 and 38 billion pounds a year. One of the larger LEPs in the country. LEPs were formed in about 2011, 2012. And one of the key responsibilities of LEPs when they were formed was that they would respond to economic crises. It's written in their terms of reference. And we are part of the architecture of government, although none of us are employed by government. And therefore, whilst we've not specifically been told in this instance to develop a recovery plan, we are in pretty much daily discussion with ministers and senior civil servants about the needs of the area. But also a number of local authorities are also developing recovery plans. And there is quite a challenge about duplication in this, which I'll sort of come on to. The third thing, in just terms of context, is about our economy. There is a very simple narrative, really, that we think the immediate impact on the economy is about a 30% reduction in output. We've done quite a lot of evidence gathering in order to determine that. Whilst the incidence of COVID in the Southwest is quite low, the impact economically has been one of the hardest in the country. And actually, we don't think that is particularly well understood. We think there is some people are using a very simple correlation that if you've got lots of COVID, then you've got lots of economic issues. But because we had some early challenges, Flyby, for example, and then the immediate major impact on the tourism sector and essentially the shutdown of hospitality pretty much overnight, then the area was hit really, really hard. And in fact, Devon, early on in the economic challenges, was identified as the hardest hit area in the country. There are now 7 in that category, and of which Devon and actually parts of South Somerset are part of that. So just quickly to go through some slides. So we published this plan end of last week. You can look at it on our website. It's on LinkedIn and things like that. So please have a look at it. It's deliberately high level. We're actually waiting for the next set of economic data, which we're hoping to get in the next week or two. So we can judge. So this is based on the initial economic impact of the COVID-19 situation. The recovery plan talks primarily about getting people back into employment. So we're forecasting unemployment levels possibly up to 12% by the autumn. But in the longer term, we think that actually the clean and inclusive growth agenda that we outlined in our industrial strategy is still the right way to go. So we recognise that in the short term, there is some really important stuff about getting people back into work, supporting those furthest from the labour market, etc. But in the longer term, high opportunity jobs, improving productivity, delivering innovation and R&D opportunities is the right sort of recovery. And we talk a lot about building back better, and certainly harnessing the opportunities of a low carbon economy would seem to be something that would be pretty important to the way we proceed. So the second thing here is around the economic challenge. So in the early impact analysis, we had more local authority areas in the bottom, most at risk of economic challenge than any other place in the country. So we had 5 of the top 20 poor performing local authority areas in terms of jobs at risk, and we had 7 of the top 15 or bottom 15, which way you look at it, that had the impact of output. So, major early impacts. That is changing a bit. We still are heavily impacted, but we're certainly starting to see an increase in impact on the manufacturing sector, and therefore places like the Midlands and the North are starting to come into it. But it is still pretty significant, and we have high levels of manufacturing in this area, particularly in Plymouth, for example. So it is really important that whilst the overall number of cases is low of the disease, the economic impact is amongst the highest, and that's a really, really important narrative. We also think, and the evidence suggests, that because of our economic or our business mix down the area, so lots of SMEs, then we have high degrees of furloughing, we have a lot of businesses that are shut, and we think the impact will be longer, not least because we are extremely vulnerable to any changes in the R value. With low levels of incidence of COVID, there's lots of people who haven't had it, and therefore we are concerned that this means that the impact may last longer across the area. So that brings me on to another important factor, is that the LEP primarily deals with the economy. It is very much a health first agenda in the Southwest. So we haven't got loads to say about that, but it is important that we recognise that health first is the primary concern of all partners involved in recovery. And the second is that we're committed to doing this on the basis of evidence, not on hearsay. And we used initially some work by Exeter University, as well as some of the RSA work that was done. We are waiting for some work from Oxford Economics, which has been commissioned, and then Exeter University, I think, are publishing a further iteration of their evidence later this month. So we will be updating this probably towards the end of the month. The next sort of principle of recovery, and this I think Sally's talked about a bit before, in terms of things happening at different times. So it doesn't all restart and everything recover all at the same time. So we've entitled our recovery plan Restart, Revitalise and Grow. And the responses you make during restart, during restart are different from those you might make during Revitalise, and different from those growing. So essentially, Restart and Revitalise are about building jobs, about getting unemployed back into work, about supporting local business directly. And then the Grow bit is about building back better, getting back to some of the productivity arguments. We deliberately haven't put timescales on it, but broadly, we think the Restart, Revitalise, and this will depend on whether there's further lockdowns and things like that, will be over the next sort of 6 to 9 months. And then we can start thinking about how we're going to grow back the economy. So one of the important things that we think is that you do things in phases and do them at different times. So this is just to show some of the evidence, really, of the early impact. So it is important that we're evidence-based. I'm not going to go into this slide in loads of detail. I think hopefully these have been shared. But these are some of the figures about numbers of people on furlough. And for example, one of the things that we are asking for is a more flexible furlough arrangement as we go forward. We think it will be important that partial furlough is available so that businesses can start to reopen and start to use people. Otherwise, we are really concerned that if it just becomes a cut-off date, then there will be a high degree of unemployment. Similarly, we think there are hardest hit communities and individuals, so particularly the young, but also older people. And we'll talk about this in a minute, but hardest hit places as well as we come on to that going forward. So this is a start of our sort of plan on a page. And so we have always used the sort of the people, the business and the place overview. So people essentially is how do you support local communities and people for skills and retraining and delivering inclusive growth. Business support is about research and innovation and also business support programs. And place is about high streets, places, coastal towns, coastal communities, etc. So initially, the hardest hit sectors were tourism, construction, which we're starting to see open up now, farming, food and fishing, which is about changing supply chains. And then the bits, well, the question mark where they surprised us a bit were major impact on creative and cultural, and also obviously retail and the impact on the high streets. We're pretty clear that part of the Building Back Better will be about digital, and certainly those businesses and sectors that have a strong presence in digital have been less impacted. And then we've confirmed those high productive opportunities, which are featured in our local industrial strategy around nuclear skills, high-level skills, digital, etc. going forward. And then the underpinning themes of clean and inclusive growth. So that leads you hopefully onto the last slide, which is about what we're asking for. So on behalf of the area, and some of the local projects will come out of the local authorities, etc., we are asking government for a shared response between government and local areas about what's needed. Some of that could be with local authorities, some of that could be with LEPs, doesn't really matter, but actually most of the restart and lockdown pieces have been imposed from the national agenda, and we're saying there needs to be a more local dimension on that. I'm hoping in the next few days we might get a letter out from the centre confirming their appetite for local recovery plans. The second is that we have identified a whole series of existing funds that are actually ready to be unlocked, and they're just waiting for decisions, and they've been held up a little bit because of COVID, a little bit because of bureaucracy. So we're trying to make sure that we just get those unlocked. So quite a lot of those are actually in the skills area. So as you can imagine, DWP have had to move quite a lot of people from the skills support into supporting universal credit applications. And we're saying actually they need to go back and make sure that they unlock some of the things that they were about to unlock, which have got stuck. The third thing, and I've heard ministers, the Prime Minister, for example, saying the way out of this is to build, build, build. And we need the government to recommit to that nationally significant infrastructure. So whether that's the A303, the digital divide, the improvements to the M5 corridor, Dawlish, etc., etc. So some of the things they've committed to, we need to build our way out of this. Fourthly, we're asking for a local fund. We've seen some of the business support grants delivered through local authorities, and we think they may well need to be extended, but essentially a call for a local recovery fund. There are some more freedoms and flexibilities in the skills agenda. Furloughing I've talked about. Government is quite interested again in our rural productivity suggestions, and we're just trying to unlock that. And then the final area is some recognition about the Southwest as a region, and making sure that we are concerned that government is focusing on urban conurbations, and therefore getting the government to recognise that the Southwest has some particular challenges that it needs to identify and work with government to solve. So the latest is we had a meeting with ministers about 10 days ago where we discussed some of this, and that's due to have a follow-up, not this week but next week. I'm hoping we will get a letter out. So we're expecting the Prime Minister to announce some measures this week about how we're going to come out of lockdown. It's important to understand that whilst there isn't a high incidence of COVID, there is a significant impact on our economy, and we need to everybody needs to work at that. And then finally, I think we're not in a bad place, if I'm being honest. I look around the other areas, and I think there has been more work done in this area about understanding the health aspects and how we might respond to that, and then particularly where we need to act collectively to support economically. So, for example, we saw a good rollout of recovery grants by local authorities a few weeks ago. So I think we're not in a bad place. It would be helpful, I think, if government provides some clarity this week around the role of local areas in delivering recovery. Thank you very much.
David, thank you very much indeed for that presentation. So I'm looking forward to your questions. So we have, if you go to the, you should have a section called questions and answers, and put something in the public area there. David, we've got a question from Alan Hyde. How hard are coastal communities likely to be hit compared to the rest of the region? And are there any specific or initial thoughts for recovery in these places?
Yeah, thank you. So, I'll get feedback and your thing off. Thank you. So, of the 5 areas that were identified as being the hardest hit, they were North Devon, Torridge, South Hams, West Devon, and I think East Devon was the 5th one. So early on, the hardest hit areas in the southwest and in the country were rural and coastal towns, and that was the pretty much caused by the impact of the close down of the hospitality sector. So it's a very fair point to make, is that they were hit really hard, really early as areas. So there are a couple of responses to that. So we, it says there that we are developing, actually with Torbay, around a coastal communities support package for coastal towns. Some of those coastal towns have already got high street funding, and so we think that is part of the solution, about repurposing some of that high street money. And then I think the third area is that I have a all-party parliamentary group on the 23rd of June across the peninsula, and we will be sharing the particular challenges, both in terms of rural and coastal towns, to that group to get their support. So our MPs are really actively involved in the tourism agenda at the moment, but we will be looking to get their support on delivering something for coastal communities and our rural towns.
Thank you, David. So time for another couple of questions. So one of the questions I've got for you, David, is how can people get involved? Because clearly you're doing the top level political part of this and getting the funding in place. At some point it has to trickle down, and what should people expect and how can they get involved?
Okay, thank you. So I've got as well, which I'll come on to after this, which is in the Q&A. So the reason for we decided to put our sort of route map to recovery out there was to issue it as an early draft, really. So I would point to people to go and look at it. It is. I want to emphasise it is based on the early evidence of impact. So we will. I think it will change a bit, particularly when we get the next sort of high-level impact analysis of the economic reality of COVID. So I think it will change. So if this group, if we can, I can send through the link and we can circulate it if people would be interested in reading it. It's not very long. It's only about 3 or 4 pages long at this stage because we decided not to publish anything terribly long. What we are likely to do, and is I've got is that we are going to formally put it out there for response. So we have across the region a group called the Economic Resilience Group, which is chaired by the Chief Executive of Devon County Council. And that involves a number of business support organisations, all the local authorities, etc. And this paper is sort of gone on behalf of them. So I think we're likely to go out for sort of some formal consultation on it to make sure that it has a resonance in what people are actually seeing on a day-to-day basis. So, for example, it calls for a specific investment in our tourism businesses. Now, it's quite difficult for us to provide direct grants to business. The simplest way of doing that is through the local authority structures. But we are saying that actually we need to recognise that those businesses have been severely impacted, and there are a number of measures to support those areas. So there's some stuff about hardest hit sectors in there. So it's a draft at the moment. So please, any feedback would be welcome. Perhaps we can circulate the link afterwards. So coming back to Heather's question, so this is about building back better, really. What is very clear to me is that there is a recognition that we will face some immediate challenges around unemployment, and particularly amongst young people, and we must respond to that agenda. But in looking at how we deliver our recovery plan, there has been a lot of support around clean and inclusive growth, and that being the medium-term solution to what we prioritise and what we progress. So I think there is a lot of buy-in to both clean and inclusive growth being at the forefront, and that includes how we bring forward our natural capital, being at the forefront of what we do next. In the same way that I think there is a recognition that commercialising R&D is still significant. So I think there is some short-term stuff about trying to maximise jobs, but quite quickly we will get back to, particularly if we can get the economy moving again, get back to an agenda that is built on the clean and inclusive growth. And one of the things we're asking government to do is to give some formal recognition to those priorities across the patch. So I think there is a sense of purpose around that. But one of the challenges of being in LEPs at the moment is that we just haven't got any money to implement this stuff. So there will need to be some money coming to the area in order to make sure we can implement some of this.
Great, thank you, Dave. So we've got Ariane has put the route map to recovery in the chat area, so you can link to that. Nick Ames has asked, what is the quantum of investment being considered under the unlocking existing funds and a Covid-19 recovery fund? Okay, so
we immediate unlocking sorry, can you just do so that's the outstanding sort of project that I was sitting essentially with civil servants saying, actually, you could just sign these off. So they range from support for the nuclear supply chain, which is 1.8 million, to some of the ESF training projects, which is there's about 12 million of those, and there's a few other bits and pieces. So one of the things our board has asked us to do is to update our pipeline of projects that are subject to future investment. There are two phases to it. One is what can be delivered up to March 21, so what can be on site by March 21. And there's about £100 million worth of projects in there. And then there's what can be delivered post 21, and there's £300 million worth of projects in there. So all in all, we've got a pipeline of about £400 million worth of projects that have been identified by local stakeholders needing funding over the next sort of probably 5 or 6 years, really. Now, some of them are very worked up, some of them are simply ideas. So we are doing a bit of an analysis of those at the moment, looking to probably push some of them into a red category, and then trying to make sure that the green ones are really robust and deliverable, and then get some of the amber ones into green. So there's roughly a £500 million pipeline of activity already identified that we think we could present to government as a response. Now, in terms of the business recovery grants, so the total level of business recovery grants, so this isn't the loans, this is the grants that went to support local business across the HotSW area, was 540 million. 480 million of that, when I last looked at the government numbers, have been given out to business, and there's about 50 to 60 million pounds that's not been delivered at the moment. One of the things we're asking for is that that sum of money is retained locally and not taken back by the Treasury in order to be allocated elsewhere. Some of you would have seen that in the last week or so there's a new discretionary grant available to local authorities. That's included in those numbers. So it's 5% of the budget, and that's included in those numbers.
Great, thank you, David. A question from Tim Westwood. Our healthcare sector, while responding positively to the pandemic, has been placed under immense pressure given the population distribution and the broad geographical area each acute hospital needs to cover. Will the Prime Minister, in his forthcoming announcement, see the healthcare sector capital programme as a priority as we move into the recovery phase?
So the honest answer is I don't know, but we have identified the healthcare sector as one of our digital priorities, and a number of those pipeline projects that I mentioned, so Plymouth Science Park, for example, deal specifically with developments in the healthcare sector. We're also doing some work with the Institute of Academic Health and Science Network. So I would never forecast what the Prime Minister might be about to say, but I think there is a recognition that the ageing economy and the challenges to the health sector generally are something that we have a degree of strength in this part of the world, and therefore it should be a priority.
Great, okay, thank you. Question from Mike Elsey. Back in early May, East Devon's MP Simon Jupp got the PM to commit, and he puts in question, in brackets, an extra 1.3 million GBP to East Devon's tourism economy. Do you know of the detail, David?
So I think slightly misrepresented. This was an announcement by the PM to provide support for the destination management organisations across the country. So it wasn't Devon specific. That figure was 1.3 million, and I think that was the what that money referred to. So I think Simon did ask the question, and that was the response he got. But I think it was actually an announcement that had been made already about 1.3 million to support tourism. Across by supporting DMOs. So most of the destination management organisations, so for example, Visit Devon, Visit Plymouth, actually not called Visit Plymouth, but they were able to access some of that money.
Thanks, David. So and one more question from me. If there are people got more questions, please just put them into the Q&A block on the system. Clearly, sort of test and trace is going to be an important part of how we get out of this. Have you got any thoughts about how we're going to get a regional responsive test and tracing system with sort of timely evidence to support what we're doing?
So I agree. I think for us to be able to open up, then an effective test and trace program is something that's essential. We have asked, so Devon is a pilot test and trace area, and we asked if that could be done across the Great Southwest, and it's been done with Cornwall. So that helps, I think, in terms of confidence around opening up. We'd actually quite like Somerset to be part of that as well. Devon are doing it with both Torbay and Plymouth as part of that. So Devon is one of the pilot areas. We were a little bit involved in the Oxford app as well, and that's, I don't think that's gone as well, to be honest. So I don't think an app is part of that, but we essentially think that there needs to provide the confidence for the tourism economy to open up. People need to be confident that we are have a system where we can track and trace and presumably local lockdowns if necessary in response to it. So that's something that we think is really, really important. I don't think we're there yet, but hopefully there will be something that comes out in the next week or two. We also might see, and I'm not sure, I know there are concerns from the health sector, but one of the things that's been suggested is by our MPs is that we're going down to 1 metre distancing to support opening up of the economy. I think there are concerns about what does that really mean, but that's something that will be interesting to see where that comes out later this week.
Great, and because I'm greedy, I just have one more question. You talked sort of en passant about the difficulty about the creative and cultural sector, which is important in our part of the world, and I just wondered whether you sort of could just dig into that a little bit more, because I think they get slightly forgotten in this whole recovery.
To be fair, I think we were guilty of that a little bit. So what that refers to is that if you look at the one of the data sheets I shared earlier, that it's clearly identified as a sector that has had a high degree of either furloughing or whatever. So it's down the bottom there, 46%. So essentially, and if you think about it, it's not that surprising really. That sector has pretty much shut down overnight. We heard a lot about B&Bs and hotels and the tourism sector, but didn't hear a lot about that. So it's really flagging up that not only is there a challenge to pubs, hotels, etc., but actually providing the support to our cultural offers, which is going to be really challenging because obviously it depends on audiences, etc., is something that we need to have direct relevance to. So I think that was something that when we did the initial impact, we hadn't really picked up, and that was something we decided that was one of our hardest hit sectors, and therefore we need to put together a plan on how we think we can deliver the new normal for that going forward.
Great, thank you very much, David. Well, thank you for joining us for this lunchtime slot. Can I just ask you to express your thanks to David in the chat area, coming to join us on this meeting and take your questions and tell us a bit about what's going on. I think I've much appreciated what is said. Thank you, David. Hope to catch up with you very soon. Even faster if I can work out how to turn off the system here. But thank you.